Now, before we begin today's session, please know that all of us at NYU hope you and your family are safe and well in these unprecedented times. In this time of uncertainty, we are so thankful you've chosen to spend some of your time with us to continue learning from the collective knowledge of our NYU community. The NYU Alumni Association represents nearly 600,000 alumni all over the world. On average, we host nearly 700 events every year to connect you with your alumni community and with NYU. In the light of the current global crisis, we have moved all of our programming online and are pleased you are joining us for today's session. Today's session features Professor Nancy Gleason of NYU Abu Dhabi and will be moderated by Amy Kais, also from NYU Abu Dhabi. If you have questions during the session, please enter in the question box on your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can at the conclusion of the program. Thanks for joining us, and Amy, I will pass it over to you.
John, thank you so much. Good morning. It's good to see you. Happy almost weekend for all of us in Abu Dhabi. Nancy, good morning to you as well. Super excited to see you. I'm just going to say again, so my name is Amy and I'm the Director of Admissions here at NYU Abu Dhabi. I'm also a parent. I have two daughters, ages 11 and 13. So I understand this working from home, schooling from home. And also very excited to have a chat with Nancy and seeing how she is taking this on, because I know she is doing this in strides. So Nancy, would you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about yourself, who you are and what you have at home?
Sure. So first I'll say thank you to you, Amy, for moderating this session, and for John for organizing it through the NYU Abu Dhabi Alumni Association. And hello to all the viewers around the world. I know I have a good crew in Singapore tuning in, and some in London, maybe some in the United States who are up late, and of course all of you here in the Gulf region.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I'm really curious about what inspired you to write about this dual schooling, which is a great term. I loved reading it about it.
Sure. So as the director of the Hilary Ballon Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning here at NYU Abu Dhabi, and in addition to my faculty role as an associate professor of practice, when we discovered that the school was going to need to go to remote instruction, I quickly was responsible, along with many other wonderful colleagues at NYU Abu Dhabi, to train our faculty to convert their face-to-face instruction to remote instruction. This resulted in a 3-day period of doing small group instruction with 91 faculty face-to-face, and then reaching more than 100 via live Zoom sessions in the following days. That was an amazing experience to do from home. And I was doing that while also preparing my young children for online instruction in their own schools. And this is all in early March of 2020. And so I realized that I'm very well resourced compared to others. One, as an educator myself, I have the tools to understand how learning works, but I was also teaching my own students while trying to deal with a 9, 7, and 5-year-old. And so I thought, given my resources and the time I have available, that I would write a piece and post it to my LinkedIn profile, which is here in the slides. And while I was doing one of my faculty trainings at NYU Abu Dhabi, I saw a colleague whose child is in one of my children's classrooms. And I said to him, well, here we go. We've got homeschooling for the foreseeable future. And he said, yeah, I guess we're dual schooling, aren't we? And so I took that phrase from him. I looked it up. It's not a thing per se. And so I call this dual schooling, when you're an educator who is educating your students and your family. But I think it applies to someone who's working remotely, whether you're an educator or not. But those of us who are educators are trying to maintain the education, the integrity of the education for our students and for our children. And so that's where the phrase came from. And I thought I would put down in paper some things that I was doing and my husband and I were doing to cope. As I said, we're very well resourced. We're fortunate enough to also have a nanny with us, which makes the situation completely different to most people in the world. I'm deeply grateful for that support, but it means that my circumstances is greatly different from others. Here in Abu Dhabi, I'm on day 16 of not going outside at all. So those in urban settings have a different context than those who can get outside. So if you're living in a condo and you've been told not to go out, then your children are not getting fresh air or playing outside. And that's a different context as well. So I tried to express some of that when writing this LinkedIn piece on dual schooling it through COVID-19. And even since I've written it, the world has greatly changed. That came up March 14th. And now we're looking in a much longer time frame. And the inequalities that already existed are being further exacerbated by COVID-19, particularly as it relates to education. So I don't know that I would have written all the same things again. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you about them again here.
No, I think it was a great article. I read it. And I think it is great. And well, it may be different now. I think it is still relevant. And as we look back years from now, I think it will be timely when people have a timestamp of exactly when an article was written and what was happening at, that day and time. So I think it's great and I appreciate it. All right, so can you talk a little bit about maybe some things that you've seen in the world and how this COVID-19 has shifted the global community and homeschooling? And because it is not just affecting us in the UAE, it has definitely affected people around the world, and maybe, in some of your research or other faculty members or even other parents, kind of what you have seen in this global community.
Sure. So if we can advance to the next slide, I can share with you some UNESCO data. We're looking at right now 1.5 billion learners being affected by COVID-19. That's 91% of the total enrolled learners in the world. And we have 188 countries with countrywide closures of schools. So this has a massive impact on education and implications for homeschooling. So we understand the risks of school closures are the worst for the most vulnerable. So it's magnifying already existing disparities within the education system, the digital divide, access to healthy meals, and inclusive learning solutions. Addressing those three problems become the priority. It's difficult to learn if you don't have access to the internet right now. And if you have access to the internet, you may be sharing devices with multiple family members and you're not able to access your course material in a timely manner. A lot of schools have a dual purpose of providing meals for students. And when you're malnourished, it's very difficult for your brain to function. So this becomes another barrier that's magnified, barrier to educational success that's magnified by the impacts of COVID-19. And then inclusive learning solutions need to come forward for all types of different learners. Myself, I have a son with learning disabilities, including dysgraphia, ADHD, and dyslexia. And so his individual education plan, which we were fortunate enough to have a school able to put that in place, is greatly disrupted. And so how can governments and societies think about inclusive learning strategies? Right now, we are in a global crisis, and these are challenges that are difficult to address, but they are the challenges that individual parents are greatly experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So I think the message is that none of this is normal. People are experiencing this in different ways, and what we know around the world is that it's not likely that we will go back to a pre-COVID-19 normal. There will be a new normal on the other side of this. We will make it through this, but we are stretching our own resilience here and trying to do the best we can through what is so far not able to see the end of it. And so I hope that this conversation not only highlights the scale of what's happening, but also what we can do as individuals to get through it safely.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think this is, you and I are able to talk a little bit today just about education. And that's just, one piece of this puzzle is also figuring out how we navigate so many other things in our lives and our children's lives, parents' lives, whatever that might be. So I think it is, just a challenge for everybody around the world, wherever you are in different stages. So I know that you have been looking at this because I have been doing it too and thinking about it. A lot of it because we have time to do this. And you've probably come up with some do's and don'ts and maybe some tips of how to survive, especially day 16. Oh my stars. That is impressive, I have to say. I at least will step outside and get some fresh air. So, and I know that you're, right down the street from me. So I applaud you. I have 2 kids, you have 3, you're outnumbered. So you are doing a great job. So maybe you can talk about some of your 5 favorite tips of how to survive this. And, we can share some things, and, I might throw 1 or 2 in there too.
Sure. Okay. So I will advance to the next slide, please. And start by saying that these are my tips for dual schooling it through COVID-19. And I think it's really important to emphasize that resources and access to resources matter here. My tips are hopefully relevant to everyone, but I acknowledge that the age of your kids matters. Your parenting circumstances matter. Are you a single parent? Are you separated from a partner? Are you also caring for your own parents in this context? And where are you eligible for relief efforts that are maybe in place in your country? So there's extreme differences in access to resources to make homeschooling work. Wellness and health come first, and the learning can come second. So I acknowledge that people are losing their incomes, they're losing their jobs, and in some extreme cases, they're losing their loved ones. And so my advice here is with the deep understanding that some of us just may not be able to cope with homeschooling, and that is okay. I've seen in some of the commentary that this isn't homeschooling, it's crisis schooling. I think it depends on the country you're in and the severity of the circumstances. But I acknowledge that none of this is normal, and that the advice I'm giving here comes with an enormous caveat that your mindfulness and wellness come first. So with that being said, my first piece of advice is to get organized. Make a schedule for what is due and when. Make a decision with your family about how much you are able to commit to this and how much is too much for you and the circumstances you're in. For some of you with small children, you may decide that your school year has already ended. It's just simply not possible for you to maintain the home care that's needed and the education that may or may not be coming to you from parents. Or your school may not be able to provide any support. And so you need to get organized about how your circumstance is going to play out in the medium term. So this could be making a schedule for you and your kids. If you do have online resources and you do have access to the internet, who is watching who when? Do you have babies, in which case they need 24-hour attention? That changes your circumstance. Or do you have high schoolers that may be more independent but need social and emotional support in a different way? I think both our children and ourselves are grieving the loss of our regular lives, and leaving space for that is really important. Honoring that grief. If you have a senior in high school, they're not going to have a graduation ceremony. If you're in a country where there's a tradition for a prom or something like that, those milestones are going to be missed. And so allowing space for that grieving is part of getting organized. Where is that happening? When is that happening? Are you in a position where you can discuss that? How is the school day going to work? Can you map that out for your family and your household? So in my family, we have recess, and that just means that there's no mandatory academic learning in place. They can play with toys, they can play with each other, but we also have times that are in short spurts, given their age, where they are focused on their academic schoolwork. And my husband and I try to be in different rooms, acknowledging that we may be giving a live webinar. And so the other person needs to be focused on the children. If you're an educator yourself, trying to take this, take your students learning online, then you need to do the same for your own course. Are there assessments you need to change? Can you pre-record your lectures or some content for the students? Can you identify resources on the internet? Can you involve an older child in that process? They may enjoy working with you on your course. So those are some basics on getting organized, but I think also then for the more extenuating circumstances, if you have an independent education plan for a child with some kind of special need? Are there resources you can pull from your broader community to support that student? And what kind of contingency plans can you start thinking ahead to now, to the extent that you have the mental capacity to do so, for some worst case scenarios? And here, unfortunately, we want to think about what to do if one or both parents or a member of the family or a person living in your household does contract COVID-19. Do you have a seclusion area in your home? Do you have backup childcare that you could talk to a neighbor or a nearby person about? And this kind of contingency planning is very difficult and painful for some to think about, but it is unfortunately a reality of getting organized in this context. And so unfortunately, I think it's wise to just think about who's nearby that may be able to help. Myself, I'm an expat, and so and new to the country I'm currently living in. You know, having to ask people I don't know very well if they could take my children in the event that my husband or I or both of us contract the virus and need to be hospitalized. These become contingency plans we need to put in place, and that's part of getting organized as well. And so I don't know, Amy, if you want to tune in on that, given that your kids are of an older age, maybe some advice you may have for getting organized or examples of how you've done it?
No, I completely appreciate that. And our schedule has changed every week. You know, we started week 1 and everybody put out their schedule, and we went and bought whiteboards so everybody could write everything else individually. And then we realized that week to week that needed to shift. And we had to build in time for different things, just like what you said. And so my older daughter, her work day, school day is really condensed. And so we had to reorganize, you know, when she even can find a time to eat, or when she can do some sort of like physical activity, even if it's just, you know, jumping up and down on, you know, a mat that we have, doing some type of, you know, push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, something. So, and myself included. So we're trying to figure out week to week as a family what our schedule needs to be, but also just realizing that it's okay if it shifts. And it's okay if it doesn't end up the exact same as it was the week before, but what each of us need just to kind of stay sane in this time. It's true.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, that we have to be flexible. What I hear from a lot of people and what I'm personally experiencing is some days are exciting and some days are just filled with fatigue. Mm-hmm. And so I think recognizing that in your children, and that the whole family may not be on the same schedule of the experience of those emotions, is part of this too. And it's a part of this sort of sustainability of the circumstances we're in. Which brings me to my second tip, which is artwork is your wellness meditation break. And if we can advance to the next slide here, I'll show you some activities that me and my children have done. So with my 5-year-old, we've been making sock puppets. If you're fortunate enough to have googly eyes in your apartment, then great, but you can also just draw on them with a marker or not. You don't necessarily need eyeballs on your sock puppets. But think about the materials you have in your house that can fill time. And this has been a really fun experience for us to think about balancing a spoon on your nose. That can take up a whole half an hour of the day. Counting out spaghetti, macaroni noodles, and then using those for lunch. So they have a dual purpose of entertaining the children and becoming your meal. So think about the products you already have in your home that can release your children's creativity, that can release their imaginations. And don't necessarily have to be an academic activity. They can be fun learning opportunities. They can also be moments where your children talk about what they're experiencing through their puppets, through their dolls, through their G.I. Joe guys, through whatever they're using, whatever toys they have at their disposal. So I think that this is also a wellness experience. And then here, another picture on the bottom is my 4th grader drawing to music. And here the exercise was Klandinsky, who was an artist with a medical condition that enabled him to see music and hear colors. And so the idea is that you paint to music. and try and express that. And we had a lot of fun doing it together. There's no screens. Take the resources you have in your home. If you don't have watercolors, you can certainly just use anything you might have in your home to color. It's a good activity to do together. It stops the clock. It stops the stress for a minute. It lets you express. You know, if you do partake in prayer, this is a moment to do that with your children. If you don't, meditation, some kind of moment where you can let your brain relax and stop. I think there is a sense and a need to fill the hours with learning, and it's really not the case that that is necessary. We need to teach our children in this moment and ourselves that stopping and doing nothing is okay. One person in my family calls it sitting time, and they just sit. I don't have that kind of patience. I can't do it. But, you know, whatever your sitting time looks like, it's extremely important to do that. And artwork and creativity is a way to get that out for the whole family. So coloring and other things. I don't know, you have older kids, Amy. What are some of the artwork or activities you guys have been doing?
No, I completely agree. My younger daughter actually has, you know, just a water board, like a water piece of paper, and she will come and just draw and paint on something when, you know, up by herself. But then we also decided, you know, I heard this from somebody else, just to relax some of the rules. And so giving them permission to paint the walls. Like inside we have a small space. I call it the Harry Potter cupboard. And you know what, they can do with it what they want, and they can go inside and they can draw and they can paint. And sometime down the road, I can get some white paint and paint over it and it'll be okay. So it's just, I would never have thought about doing that, but in this situation, it's like, why not? You know, it's a way for them to think about it, to be creative, and to do something that is not in front of a screen. So I think it's great.
I love that idea.
I love the sock puppet.
Yeah, I'm totally copying the paint the wall idea. That's fabulous. Yeah, so I think that linking this artwork to your wellness and your meditation, possibly your prayer, is a good option. So if we could advance to the next slide, I will bring us to the next tip, which is educational games are your friend. And so maybe the formal learning in your household isn't happening for a bunch of reasons. Maybe, unfortunately, the teachers in your school have not been able to rally. I know, for example, in Nigeria right now, there's a national strike by educators for an unrelated reason to COVID-19. And so there is no formal school education occurring. And so as a parent, what can you do to fill the days in those circumstances? Or maybe you're just in an under-resourced school that hasn't been able to figure out this environment, or you're a family where your school put the information online and you don't have access to the internet or a device. And so here, I think educational games are a great way to fill the time, to keep stimulated, to spend time together. If you have more than one child, they can do these games together, but you can also play with your kids. So even Monopoly is a game where there's math, there's schemes, there's planning. If you do have access to video games, there's virtual Monopoly, but there are lots of games your kids can play where they are learning. If you don't have access to those resources, or even if you do, a fabulous activity is to make your own new home game for the family. Find the pieces around the house, think through the rules, make the manual. This can take a whole week. And it's planning, it's creativity, and it's getting at those underlying skills and empathy and resilience that we want our children to have. So you may already have board games in your house. We attempted Scrabble. Turns out our kids are too young for that. So these are, you know, learning curves for us too. What board games do we have in the house that we can play? But puzzles are wonderful. They go back to the previous point on meditation. Put on quiet music or no music and a puzzle. We did a puzzle the other night with a quiet contest. And it was wonderful. And there's giggling, There's, trying not to laugh, there's sharing pieces and humming, but it just was a different way to go about the puzzle. And so we also did a puzzle swap with a neighbor who lives on another floor in our building. So we both washed off all our puzzles with cleaning wipes and left them outside each other's apartments for 24 hours and then brought them inside. And we didn't see each other in that process. So I think this was a safe way to stay within the restrictions of not mingling, but we had fun sending each other pictures of completing each other's puzzles, and doubled our resources in a time where that was needed. So educational games, I think, are a great way to get at this. If you do have access to a smartphone, there are so many fun games your kids can play that include, if you have primary age children, spelling, mathematics. I saw some families saying, well, this is it. This is when I'm going to teach my kids to type. For those of you who may be in my age bracket, I learned on sticky bear typing. And I went and looked it up. It does exist still on the internet, but sort of in a sketchy form. So I don't know. But there are typing games where your children can finally learn the keyboard in an effective way if they haven't yet. So
I love all of these ideas, and I love how you just say be creative. I think sometimes it is just thinking outside the box and being willing to let it go, and sometimes to let them choose what they're doing. I am so curious about, because your children are younger than mine, about their cooking ability and what this looks like in your house, because we also do this, and I have required both my daughters for the last, because we're ending week 5, every week they both have to plan and cook a meal. And I have also had to just let things go. Last night we had fried chicken and fried potatoes. Delicious. There was nothing green on my plate. It was it was fine, but it was planned and it was delivered. So I'm curious with your little ones, like, what does this look like?
Yeah, so we had smoothies for dinner last night because that is what my 7-year-old chose.
Perfect.
And I've been trying to ration our fresh food a little bit. So I was frustrated that all the fruit we had in the house went into that one activity. We can go out for grocery shopping here in Abu Dhabi, but we're trying to minimize that. But that was his choice and we were fine, but I think so having the kids plan meals and cook them is great. There's mathematics in the ingredients, getting out a cookbook with them if you have access to multiple ingredients. But I also think for families with fewer resources, this may be giving them some choice just to empower them. It may not be about what you're actually eating. It may be about, okay, tonight, would you like to have the ramen noodles or the spaghetti? And you can choose that. Or would you like to have some beans for dinner? So sometimes the choice alone is empowering, but to the extent that you have access to cookbooks and a variety of ingredients, then I think setting out a plan, realizing how long it takes to prepare different things, realizing that there are some ingredients we don't have access to, checking your privilege. Oh, it didn't taste good. Guess what? We're still going to eat it. We're not going to waste food in this context, and we shouldn't be wasting it anyway. What is the sustainability of the resources? One night we had our 9-year-old look at where all the ingredients he'd chosen had come from, and to think about what the impact on the environment of that might be, and the farmers who were collecting the ingredients for us. And so I think even if they're not old enough to actually use the hot oven or those sorts of things, they may be old enough to think through the ramifications, and they can always do dishes. I mean, aside from being under 2, I think even a 2-year-old can put their toes in the sink and squish and splash the water. Including them in the process it takes to prepare a meal. But also for us, we've been trying to sit at the table 3 times a day. And this has been challenging. It turns out breakfast is not an option. They just get up too early, or one of them wants to sleep in, or one of us, my husband or I, have an early meeting. But we're trying to eat the meals together in order to make that a moment where we check in, we see how people are doing. But like you said, being flexible. If one of them just isn't in the mood, fine. But we don't want them to waste food, and they have to finish their meals to the extent that they're full.
Yep.
And if we're privileged to put a green vegetable on the plate that night, they need to eat it. That's non-negotiable. So this planning the meals is also about staying healthy. It's easy to for me in my household, we're just trying to make sure that there's a vegetable twice a day, because if this is going to go on for a long time, we really do need to stay healthy as best we can. And that eating those vegetables helps our mental wellness. And so figuring out how to make that fun and integrate that with your kids, I think is part of the dual schooling experience.
Which I think is a great segue into number 6, get sleep and practice self-care, which I think out of all of these is probably the most important. All of us try to do, and whatever that is for you and your family, because I truly believe that every family has a different interpretation of what self-care is and how much sleep you actually can get. But I agree with you of just trying to be healthy, both emotionally, physically. All of it is number one, and whatever that is in your family. So I appreciate everything that you've said.
Yeah, and so for number 6, the last one, it's get sleep and practice self-care. And here I think routine is really important. It's very hard to maintain routine in this environment, but we know that routine helps, especially children, decrease anxiety. It's good for them. So that goes back to number 1, setting out a plan. But just because tomorrow isn't a normal school day doesn't mean they don't have bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
And so the sleep is essential to their well-being, and the routine is essential to their ability to manage this situation, the sense of crisis, and the agony we're all going through in trying to manage this circumstance. I say agony with a bit of a humor because it's just a daunting task to all be home together all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the sleep, if you have children who take naps, maybe you can nap with them. If you have that kind of flexibility with your employer. If you have children who go to bed on the early side, maybe 1 night a week, 2 nights a week, you go to bed with them. If you have children who get up throughout the night, what can you do to minimize that? Not that you weren't trying to figure that out before COVID-19. If you live alone, how can you get sleep and practice self-care in a routine-based manner? We know that without sleep, our brains do not replenish themselves. We know that expression that I feel foggy today. That's literally because your brain didn't get the opportunity to clean itself out. And so humans need about 8 hours of sleep. Teenagers need more. Male teenagers need even more. Their frontal lobe is not formed yet. They sleep at a different time of day than the rest of us. So recognizing that not as a sign of laziness or anything else, but having some compassion, honoring the stress of the experience and the anxiety that it can cause in a lot of us through the allowance of sleep is really important.
I think my 13-year-old must have slipped you that note, because she is every day wanting to sleep in a little bit later and a little bit later, which I have to recognize. And it's also the weekend coming up, and so she'll get to, but you're exactly right. I mean, there's a huge difference between an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, and what their bodies need and what they're asking for. So yeah, I agree with you. So I think everybody kind of has to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
So speaking of older students, and I know that there's some parents out there that are really worried, especially maybe if you have high school students, or even if you have a college student and you're navigating this as an educator, teaching students, right? And just thinking about and working with faculty on campus. And I know that they're still teaching classes, and I know that, our college students, which you and I have talked a lot about our own children today, but just also thinking about how college students who are currently taking classes and how they're also navigating this. Can you talk a little bit about, like, maybe to parents that are worried about learning loss? Because I know that there's a lot of parents out there that are just really concerned that all of a sudden, their students have stopped learning. And this may be a complete shift in how they learn for the next, 4 to 5 years even.
Sure. Sure. So I wanted to draw attention to a piece from the Harvard Graduate School of Education for this question. It's come up a lot. You know, if you read social media, there's a wide variety of responses. There's forget it. I'm not doing this homeschooling thing. My kindergartner does not need 5 activities a day from their lovely teacher, to what am I going to do? My child was supposed to take a college entrance exam or some kind of qualifying exam for some kind of thing. This wasn't, if they are a college student, this semester is really important to my GPA. I want to go to this job or that graduate school, or whatever their circumstances. There's concern about learning loss. And so my advice there, if this is your concern, and I would say that being concerned about learning loss is a privilege in this context, but nonetheless a valid one. And so we want to re-examine what learning looks like if this is your concern. And the question I put here is cut and paste from the article that's referenced here. How can we all think creatively about utilizing this time to maximize what our goals are for our kids? We want them to be happy. We want them to be creative. We want them to be resilient. We want them to be problem solvers, and we want them to be happy. And so can we get at those learning objectives? Whether or not we use the worksheets and activities and lessons that our educators may be able to provide us. If you're an educator yourself, then what are the learning goals you can get at? And so from this article that's referenced here, Jennifer McComb, who's a psychologist, is talking about how we can optimize the less amount of time we have. And you may have seen on the internet that parents are saying, well, I'm done the activities by 11 a.m. or 1 p.m. And here we have to realize that if you have younger children and there's a class of 20, 27, 37, however large your class sizes are in your institution, it takes a long time to get every little kid in the classroom to turn to page 37. But if it's just you and them, that happens much faster. They're not taking recess. They're not walking to the bathroom. They're not dilly-dallying with their classmates. So yeah, we're done school much earlier in the day. That's okay. You do not need 6.5, 7 hours of learning a day. So that's not learning loss. The way I think about it with my own students here at NYU Abu Dhabi is do less of a higher quality. And in my own class, I removed 1 reading from each week so that we could really dive into the other readings we had and go at them in a different way so that I could get the students to execute what I want them to be able to execute with less material to do that in. And some of them like it. Those who haven't had a chance to tell me yet, but I think it's going well. And so here my point, again, as noted on the slide, is it's really engaged time in academic learning that's creating the learning, not necessarily the number of academic minutes in a school day. And so what we know is that learning happens in small repeats of information. So if you can come back to that information with your child here and there in different ways throughout the day or throughout this whole crazy experience, they will learn. So if they're learning basic mathematics, can you count the peas on the plate? It doesn't have to be sitting there in an academic moment with potentially a screen on or a worksheet. And we also know that once you've learned something, it's easier to relearn. So there's not necessarily going to be tons of learning loss here. Yes, it matters more for our students at critical education junctures than it does for our smaller learners. But we experience breaks in our learning regularly in the academic year anyway. We have summer learning loss, the winter break, some schools have March break or harvest breaks, depending on what country you're in. These last 6 weeks to 1 week to 3 months. And the science there says that there is some learning loss, but that students can gain that back quickly in a regular academic setting. So my advice is that don't worry about the learning loss. If your child is at a critical juncture, then your child is in the same boat with a lot of other learners. It matters how your government responds. It matters how the institutions that your student is enrolled in or intends to enroll in respond to that. And so I don't know, Amy, maybe you as the Director of Admissions could talk a little bit about the advice you have for those who are in high school right now?
Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, I have a niece who is a rising senior, and we had a long conversation because she's very nervous. She's like, I can't take the SAT, I can't take the ACT, I can't go visit colleges, I can't just take a campus tour, which at the very least. And so, at the end of the day, most universities, and speaking from a U.S. University perspective, are not going to make the student at any disadvantage because of what they're unable to complete. Same thing for our students right now that are seniors. For many students who are doing programs like the International Baccalaureate or they're doing the British A levels, those tests have been canceled. And so the student can't take those tests. And so we are evaluating, well, what can you give us? And whatever your high school is able to give you, then you can give us. Same thing for rising seniors that are worried about applying for colleges next year. What can you do, right? What are you able to do? Then that will become the essential part of your college application. I'm on a lot of different listservs, and I'm seeing every day there's another institution in the United States that is becoming test optional because they understand that students are worried. I can't submit an ACT or an SAT, and so what can you look at? And there's a lot of institutions out there right now that are already test optional, and that might be perfect for your son or daughter that is looking at schools. But I agree with you, Nancy. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to do, whatever you can, and, if it's a half a day, a part of a day, and understand that at institutions, we are also looking at this and understanding, and we're going to be very sympathetic to the students because they're not choosing to skip an ACT or an SAT. They're not choosing to not have their final IB. They're not choosing to not be able to take the A levels. So, and we're navigating this day by day, hour by hour, but I just want to take that pressure off of students. Colleges are still open. We still want you in our classrooms, whatever that looks like. We still want you to graduate. We still want you to become an alumni, right? Like part of this is we need alums. And so we are still going to bring, students into our classrooms. It just may be a little bit different this year, but that's okay. Students can just take back and take a breather. So. All right, yeah. I want to be mindful. Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
I wanted to point out too that for parents to remember if they are in that IB situation or SAT or whatever have you, GRE, whatever you were practicing for that's canceled now, those are years of preparation for those examinations. And there's a loss in not being allowed to perform, not being allowed to show how hard you worked. And so as parents, we can also think about how to help our children navigate that missed opportunity. No one wants to take those tests, and for some maybe it's a nice moment, but they have nonetheless been working extremely hard to perform on those examinations. And thinking about at least letting the students talk through it, maybe even letting them take a mock exam and you mark it for some closure, right? There's a need for closure around these preparations that are not going to happen. So I think that's a point to add to that moment.
That is a great resource. So final question, because I do want to give some time to people if they have questions for us. Maybe you can share some of your resources or with people who are watching and listening, some resources that we can recommend to others.
Sure. So on the next slide, I have a few, I only put 2 because the information that's out there is completely overwhelming. And I wanted to just point out that all museums now have websites for educators and tours for children. And so if you have access to the internet, this is a great place to sit your child down and get some free time for yourself. So they can take a tour with the museum staff. They can, and almost all museums in the world have done this, and they've done it in multiple languages. So it's a great way to tee it up for yourself if you need to go have a meeting or do something. So you can have your partner or someone else in the home tee them up while you have a meeting like this or a live Zoom session, and send your students off. And then there are also lots of organizations that have now made the material that you normally have to pay for free. And I just listed one here. National Geographic has created and made free tons of interactive educational videos for your children. So of all ages. So maybe you've decided to step away from the formal curriculum because that's what's right for your family. But this is a great educational time for them to be on the internet. And for example, if you're trying to manage screen time in a home where you have lots of screens, you know, a compromise may be, okay, you can be on a device for an extra hour each day or 2 hours, whatever you need to survive, 3 hours, but it has to be educational. And in that case, there are tons of resources like this that are available. So Cengage has made all National Geographic resources free. If you're an academic, there are tons of publishers who have now made all of their resources free around the world. And this is particularly exciting for higher education institutions that don't have access to this material normally. So you can download all those readings, print them out, do what you need to do. It's legal. You're not breaking copyright laws for now. Through the end of May, most publishers have made tons of academic resources free. And you know, some people say now's the time to upskill yourself. I'm hesitant about that. I think we're already trying to be superhuman, working from home while raising our children during a global pandemic. But I don't think that means you can't be thinking about how you are improving as a human being through this. Taking notes for yourself, journaling, what are you doing differently? What will you learn from this for yourself? Can that be a part of your own mental wellness to reflect on this experience? And later that may be relevant to an employer. But of course, if you want to engage in intense lifelong learning, there are now tons of free courses to upskill yourself. But I appreciate that suggesting that in the midst of all of this is pretty crazy. I don't think I could handle having homework on top of everything else right now, but no, maybe one of you out there can.
No, I agree with you. It's like, and every morning, you know, like if you just get on the web and you look, there is increasingly more information of how to keep yourself busy at home. And it's almost too much, right? I find myself going, oh gosh, I got to try this app. Oh gosh, I got to try this one. Like now there's so many things out there. So I also have realized I need to step back and not, you know, tell myself that I have to engage in all of these things to make my life easier at home, right? And so sometimes I just find myself going, it's okay. I do appreciate a lot of the different companies that are making their apps for free. And so whether it is a cooking app, a workout app, a whatever it is, if you can just, if it's important for my well-being, you know, I do appreciate if this is something that I am searching for, that I can hop on really quickly and just useful. But it's also stressful to search out items to keep me busy. So I appreciate what you said about that of being a lifelong learner. It's okay just to sit back a little bit. So yes, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, my
pleasure. I love these ideas. I didn't have these, so these are great. And I was, you know, thinking like I would like to sit and go through some of these museums with my kids that I haven't been able to do. So I appreciate this.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few minutes. John, do you?
Yeah, hey guys. So we got a couple questions. Can you see the questions too, Amy, or?
Yes. So. Oh, well, there's somebody else who commented that the National Park Service also does virtual walks through national parks. Who knew?
That's excellent. Yeah, I mean, especially for those of us who can't get outside, there's a lot of cities and countries with full lockdowns in place, or in our case, it's 104 degrees here today in Abu Dhabi. And we're following stay-at-home suggested orders. But yeah, the national parks it's exciting and relaxing for your kids to watch that. You can watch it with them. And it's at least a way to trick your mind. Listen to water, for example. I miss listening to water. I don't know.
Yeah, I do too. There is also another suggestion here, which I also agree with, of just getting young people to reflect on the skills that they are learning, not just what's in the books, right? So, using things that are, like you said, like in your pantry, like just like figuring things out of how can I keep myself busy with something that is not at my school, that is not organized sports, that is not whatever I used to use in the past. You know, how can I shift into what you know, what am I able to do now? So I think that those are great.
Right, and I also think that uh, you said reflecting on the skills they're learning, but also mine are learning how to be bored in a way they have never learned how to be bored before. And I think that's a very important cognitive moment. I'm not a neuroscientist or a psychologist, but I think it's not my job to entertain them 24 hours a day. And so sometimes my response is, good, go lie on the floor and look at the ceiling.
Yeah, which is fine.
It's good for them. That's how their brains reset. If they need to figure out how to entertain themselves, that's a task in and of itself. And so if we constantly do that for them, we're not doing them any service.
No, I completely agree with you. And so it is not, I love to go look at the ceiling. I'm going to use that one next. Just like, all right. So there are not a ton of other questions. So I think that we can end there. If you have any other final thoughts, thank you for putting up our emails here. For everybody that's listening, they can email us directly with questions, concerns, other ideas and resources, or just to say hi, I'm with you in the same boat and feel what you're feeling. Or, you know, I'm always interested in hearing what other people are doing. So
yeah, and I would just remind everyone, regardless of where our country's at, the number one thing you can do to help is stay home. And so please do that, whatever country you're in, stay home. That's what we've been asked to do around the world. And it's one of the ways we can help bring this pandemic to an end. So I hope that this gave you some ideas on how to stay home, stay healthy, stay well. And I wish everybody good luck through this time.
I agree. I think our vice chancellor said yesterday, her quote was, the health of one is the health of all.
Yeah.
And so it is so true. So I appreciate your time, Nancy, and I look forward to when I can see you, you know, in person sometime.
Yeah, and I will, one more last shout out. Thank you to everybody who's not staying home, because they're making the economy work for us so that we can get food on the table. To the delivery workers, to the cleaners, to the farmers. I appreciate that staying home in and of itself is a privilege too. So thank you to everybody who tuned in, and thank you to you, Amy, so much for the great work you do for NYU Abu Dhabi, and thank you to John. I'm so excited to be able to talk with NYU Abu Dhabi alums and everybody out there. So thank you so much. Stay safe, stay home.
Yeah, thank you, John, for doing this. This is great. This is fun. All right, you guys, have a great day, great week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Nancy.